Ready, not Roddy. Well, in fact, I want to start by just commenting on the fact that Dr. Roddy has given us a wonderful example of scientists exercising their responsibility, basing it, of course, on sound scientific principles in giving science advice to policymakers, and policymakers listening in this case. I want to turn, though, to the other side of the coin, as it were, and to go back to Dr. Arnold's talk, your very last slide, in which you indicated a number of binary opposites, including truth against lies, and really just comment on the responsibility that we have as scientists to combat the various instances of misinformation, of pseudoscientific and anti-scientific acts which seriously undermine the role of science in broader society, and in respect of which we have a responsibility to combat. So, Dr. Arnold, I was just curious, I wanted to know, with regard to your role on the Council of Advisors, it's called, to what extent these kinds of efforts, that is, in combating misinformation and the like, form part of your agenda, or the agenda. Thank you.
I think it's a problem that should concern all of us, right? Because what's the good of science advice if people don't take it, right? And that means governments, but it also means citizens. So I envy you, Dr. Roddy, that you not only had the voice, but you had a receptive audience that knew how to take that advice. And this is the challenge that we have faced on so many problems, from climate change to COVID. So the White House, I know, and Jane, maybe you are even far better to speak about this, with Francis Collins as my co-chair on the council. We're investigating the role of, how do you communicate science to people, right? Research, science is easy. We're all here because science is easy. It's people who are hard. Oh, they're really, really hard. And that takes a lot more than we're trained to do. Jane, did you?
Sorry? May I add a short remark also dealing with Professor Arnold's presentation? You mentioned the visional or even utopian element in chemistry, the visionary or even utopian element in science. I wonder whether one could also go even further and speak about the visionary or utopian dimension of science, dealing with the unknown, not just with fantasy, but also in the form of a very reflected and controlled step. In science, we are not only reconstructing reality, but also, in a way, creating reality. But doesn't this mean that we have to add to your list at the end of your presentation? First, you mentioned hope. Hope, yes, but responsibility too?
I don't have to respond to that. That's a great addition. Responsibility.
Professor Balcombe.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make an observation that one of the most pressing problems facing humankind over the next decades involves food security. It's a challenge that has received relatively little mention in the sessions today, and many of the technologies that we've heard about, ranging from predicting protein structure through to evolutionary biochemistry, horizontal gene transfer, and others all have resonance and relevance to developing new strategies of or improving global food security. And I hope that our closing statement will make some reference to the relevance of the science that we've heard about in that context. But I would just like to invite any of the speakers to comment on the relevance of their science to global food security.
So, David, I participated in the agriculture, the food summit that the Pontifical Academy put on last year. One of the applications of enzymes is to make pheromones that are currently now pheromones to replace toxic insecticides. You just confuse males, and so the moths don't mate in the field. It's one of the simplest possible solutions, but it's a chemistry problem. So if you make those biologically, they're now available in Kenya to smallholder farmers. You can bring the cost down so that people can afford it. And this is just one example of an explosion in ideas on reducing the environmental impact of agriculture, providing safer and more effective foods, something you know a lot about. And yeah, I think that it's a really exciting field for the bioeconomy and the biotechnological revolution. I'm very excited about that future.
Our president, von Braun, is very interested in food. And I would add that myself, I also, from this academy, I'm very much against the Malthusian ideas until 2050. Until 2050, we will have population growth, and then it will stabilize and then go down. So I would also make the point that we need the food now, before 2050, so that prevents starvation in the world. So it's extremely important. I don't know if Professor von Braun would like to add something to that.
Happy to. We will keep the theme of food and nutrition security on the agenda of this academy. We had 3 workshops in the last few years related to the production issues, the opportunities of transgenics, and the issues of food waste and losses, as well as a broad-based workshop in preparing for the UN Food Systems Summit last year. And we have just decided in the council yesterday to have a conference on acute food crisis. So we have lots of solutions for the medium and long term. And we need to scale them up. But science has given short shrift to deal with acute crisis. It's not just a management issue, and the connection to the issues of politics, the issues related, so we should do that together with our sister academy, and the issues of the climate crisis, creating more and more unknowns to which the food and water systems need to respond is on our mind. So we want you to be part of this, David.
I wonder if Ada would like to, please, Ada. You're in mute. There must be a mute button.
I think that I unmuted it. So I was amazed by several lectures all the day. But of course, the very last ones are more clear to me, or more in front of my thoughts. So I'm talking about I want to ask about the lecture of Professor Wadi that told us something extraordinarily for me, that a bunch of scientists could tell the country what to do, the administration of the country, the government, the teachers, and so on, which hardly, in my opinion, hardly happens. So my question is, was the whole atmosphere different? What turned the synergism between the scientists and the nation in terms of, in this case, it was pandemic, but how did it happen? Are there more children that are going to study? Is the level of studying higher? The knowledge is higher? What made it happen?
I don't know who would like to answer that.
This was to
Yes. Werner,
Yes.
would you like to say something, or?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's an answer appropriate, but do you remember in my talk, I mentioned golden rice, and I just shortly explained this was done by Pontificus and his colleagues in order to introduce the capacity of rice seeds to also contain vitamin, because in many developing countries, the farmers eat 3 times a day just rice and nothing else practically. And their wives, of course, they and their wives have not enough or no vitamin A at all. And this is very important for the growth of the embryo. So it's very difficult for these people to have healthy children. And I introduced that as an example that as an example that horizontal gene transfer can be done in the laboratory in order to improve the healthiness of our food. And there are certainly in future times other similar undertakings.
Thank you. Next question is by Demi Hassabis.
I was just going to also answer David's question, which I would love to talk to you after, about how much more we can help. But one of the things we did with AlphaFold was prioritize plant species and specifically crop species, because I felt we could make the biggest differential there, in a sense, because I didn't realize till we started the whole AlphaFold project how much bigger the proteomes are for plant species like wheat and rice and so on. And of course, there's only a tiny fraction, as I understand it, less than 1% or 0.1% that are known, the structures. So we prioritize those to hopefully make the biggest difference. And I'd love to hear how you're using that. But I spoke to Jennifer Doudna about it in her institute. She's looking at, she uses the AlphaFold structures plus CRISPR to try and increase crop sustainability in the face of climate change, which is, would address one of the issues that you're talking about. So I was really amazed and pleased to hear she was using it for that. But I'd love to hear what you're doing in Cambridge with it, and if we can help more.
2 more questions, one by Rafael Radi and finally Cardinal Turkson.
I may make a comment on what Professor Schonat said, and just to provide some additional background on this experience. One word I never heard provided to a scientist, that was one of the surprising things we were hearing from regular people, was you guys give us confidence You know, as a scientist, I was hearing about this is a good paper, nice data, but confidence. So that was like a shock to us at the beginning, and it was for all the 60 people. Then sometimes people say, we really trust you guys. We trust what you say. So that's capital, that's a treasure we need to protect. And that, when it's a long process, like it's a 2-year process, you really need to protect this because there are pressures and tensions everywhere. So we need to be confident in what we do and minimize these tensions left and right, because we are playing another game, which in this case was the game to mitigate the pandemic. So to be fair and objective is key. And then we were in the public eye, and that brings some other types of problems. So there were threats, and many of our organizations were not ready to respond to that. So personally, many of us had to do things that would have been much better taken care of by the institutions, which responded later. So whenever you touch a sensitive issue for the society, like climate change, or food security, or a pandemic, if scientists take that step, then there will be some type of coming back response from people that won't want to hear that. And institutions, academies, universities, research institutes must be ready to protect, because otherwise the next generations of scientists won't get involved. Thank you.
Well, and to close this session, then, we call on Cardinal Turkson.
I certainly did not wish to close the session, but so we just said for Professor Haber, creation is ongoing. It's still on. We heard from Professor Francis about genetic editing and the different factors in society that cause it to modify and all. I just want to ask whether the modification or addition of genetic systems, DNA systems, are always intentional, voluntary, or can be non-voluntary. In other words, can the ingestion of food, medication, or something induce some such modification of the DNA system of people and things?
So a lot of people worry about modifications made in the test tube, but I'd like to point out that our footprint on this planet has modified everything. That every action we take, from washing our hands with antibacterial soap to breeding poodles, has created biological things that would not be here without us, right? So we're part of a great big interconnected web, and our effect on that web is outsized. There is no other organism that has that, and it's not necessarily to the benefit. So.
Okay, so it means that the DNAs can be edited, modified involuntarily. We do that all the time. He shakes his head, does not agree. So.
I think you're answering two different questions. There's nothing that you're going to drink that will immediately change your DNA. That's the sort of fear that we hear from the general public. But the idea that our DNA and the DNA of the world is fixed and never changing is also a false idea. It doesn't happen immediately from drinking, a funny drink. It happens over a period of time that can be greater or shorter. I was thinking on the various themes coming about here, and if I can make 3 quick points. The first is the importance of speaking to the public, answering questions like the fears that you're hearing from and that you're talking about. It is so important for scientists to do the hard thing, to talk to people. The second is the humility that we need to have when we speak to the public, because I think the transparency that you brought to the system was an essential part of it. People could see that you didn't have all the answers, that we're looking for the answers, and that we're not afraid to say. This comes from education, in fact. Too often we teach science as you pass the course if you got the answers in the back of the book. And of course, that's not what science is at all. And my final third point is the responsibility to do that, in many ways, lies with us astronomers, with the people who spoke at the beginning, because we are the least political. We have been blessed so far with not being caught up in the culture war. And so I think we are the ones who can carry the banner of what is good science and help out the other people in this room who have been caught up in the culture war.